It's The Lit Show with Jeremy Fee. New episode each Tuesday. Authors welcome, comments encouraged. Hello everyone, welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. As always, I've got something special for you today. I hope you are as excited as I am for my July 2022 book Battle, my reading wrap-up. With these videos, I have been doing a TBR after my book battles, and I decided not to do that this time. I will make a separate video for my August TBR, so stay tuned for that. It'll be out as soon as I can edit it, because I'm going to record it right after I record this one. I just don't want to edit it all in. I'm afraid this may get a little long, as these book battles tend to get. I'll go ahead and put up the books that I read for the month up on the screen, so you can think about which books that you will be rooting for in the book battle. As you may know, I enjoy each month talking about what I've read in this kind of comparison style, back and forth. Coming up first, in our first bracket, the first pairing, we've got The Bullet Train. No, it's not called it's just called Bullet Train. Bullet Train by Kotaro Isoka. This book has a film coming out. I mistakenly thought that film was coming out in July because I have seen so many trailers for it this summer. Apparently it's coming out in August. I could have waited to read it, but I did read it and discovered that the main character does not seem like Brad Pitt. The main character in the book seems very different from what I would picture as a casting of Brad Pitt, but I do think it's good when they make film adaptations and cast famous actors like Brad Pitt, because it brings a lot of attention to the film, potentially helps it to make more money, so that's good. It is up against the book Babel by R.F. Kuang, which has a much longer subtitle to it, but we're just going to go ahead and go with Babel, because I didn't write down that long subtitle. And quite frankly, I'm not sure what the publisher was thinking, because if you don't ignore the subtitle like I did, then when you finish reading the book, you may realize that that subtitle is a bit of a spoiler. In fact, halfway through the book, you may go, you know what? That subtitle is a bit of a spoiler. So perhaps the author intended for you to know that sort of spoilery information by putting it in that long extra part of the title for the book. Who knows? Just as a disclaimer, I did meet R.F. Kuang in real life, Rebecca Kuang. I knew her when she was in high school as a part of the speech and debate community in the Dallas, Texas area. Out of these two books, I'm going to give the victory to Babel. I enjoyed it a whole lot. It was very refreshing fantasy. It feels like historical fiction, but it certainly has fantasy elements to it. The kind of fantasy elements that you might expect in a book similar to a Brandon Sanderson book, maybe in the same sort of sense that you have an academic setting with something that Patrick Rothfuss might write, but kind of magic system similar to Brandon Sanderson. But probably R.F. Kuang is calling it dark academia. Very popular term right now, but it works. I highly recommend Babel. I was able to read it through NetGalley. I got a free ebook, so thank you to the publisher and the author for that. Up next, we've got a pairing of Nosferatu and its prequel graphic novel Wraith by Joe Hill. I'm just pairing them together up against another Joe Hill book, which is Horns. These books came out years ago, but I somehow missed out on the hype train back then. And from this month, I can tell you I've enjoyed Joe Hill's writing so much, I'm going to be seeking out more from Joe Hill in the future. If you go online and look at a picture of him, it looks like Stephen King cloned himself and raised a clone of him. And the books by Joe Hill read a lot like Stephen King books, which is not surprising because Joe Hill is secretly the son of Stephen King. That's right, you heard it here. I got the scoop. Nosferatu is really fun and entertaining as a horror novel. I was able to get the audiobook and listen to it on Audible, and it is narrated by Kate Mulgrew, an amazing actress who played Captain Janeway on Star Trek Voyager. I had no idea she was so good at voices. Like, she does the voices of the characters really well. Makes it a lot of fun. It really is an entertaining entertaining read to listen to. I highly recommend that. And that is why I probably might be a little more biased toward it, and I'm going to give the win to Nosferatu. Even though Horns was also entertaining, Nosferatu is weird. I feel like Horns goes a bit more out into the bizarre territory. Though if you read the graphic novel Wraith, it is also very weird. That brings us to our next bracket. In this next pairing, another Joe Hill book. It's Heart-Shaped Box. A lot of people say this is their favorite book by Joe Hill. It's really good. I liked it. It is up against Upgrade, which is a Blake Crouch novel, another one that I got from NetGalley, which by now is out. But when I was reading it early in July, it had not come out yet. I think it came out in the middle of July. Upgrade is science fiction. It does deal with kind of genetic manipulation in the sort of sense that I feel that if you are someone who may have been traumatized by COVID-19, by the pandemic, then this may bring up some emotions for you, which I don't think was intended by the author. But I felt some emotions when I was reading it, thinking about that. Really, it's a detective story. It's an interesting sci-fi detective story. If you can ignore the virus stuff as being emotional psychologically, then I think you'll really enjoy the book if you enjoy detective stuff and interesting science fiction that deals with genetics. Between Heart-Shaped Box and Upgrade, though, I'm gonna give the win to Joe Hill again for Heart-Shaped Box. I liked the creepy elements in this horror story. Up next is a pairing of Jaws, the novelization by Peter Benchley, up against Legion, which is the sequel to The Exorcist. It's by William Peter Blatty. I enjoyed both of these books. What happened was last month I was reading that Grady Hendrix book about all the great paperbacks from hell back in the day, and I realized I needed to go back and read more of them. That's what you see with these and with the next 4 books after it. In the Jaws story, I was surprised because I don't think I've seen the movie. If I did, it was when I was a little kid and I don't remember it. Maybe I just saw scenes from the movie. I'm not entirely sure. But I was not expecting so much of the Jaws story to be about adults having affairs, about the wife of the law enforcement officer and her meeting up with this guy and all that stuff. I was expecting more of shark action, and it was more of human psychological drama, which is perfectly fine. It just wasn't what I was expecting. I'm going to give the win to Legion, which is interesting. For whatever reason, I like these stories about possession and about the religious authorities having to make difficult calls and having to deal with the kind of politics and media ramifications of the situation. So Legion is advancing. When we get to the next bracket, it's the Amityville Horror by Jay Anson up against The Omen by David Seltzer. I have seen the Amityville Horror films, and I remember watching them when I was younger and being freaked out. I know that I did some research online to try to understand the aspect of how they call it a true story, that it's based on a true story, even though it's about ghosts, hauntings, possessions, that sort of thing. I was kind of mixed in my mind of whether or not I might have read this book or parts of this book when I was younger and just forgot. Either way, though, the Amityville Horror book doesn't read as much as fun, exciting prose as you might think. Kind of comes off more as journalism. So it's an easy win for The Omen here, with more exciting possession, the religious figures with conflict. Up next after that, we've got Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin up against The Rats by James Herbert. Both of these books were just amazing. Rosemary's Baby was so freaky. The cult-like thing. And my favorite aspect of the book, without trying to give too many spoilers, even though this is from a long time ago, was the fact that it is framed as a narrative of potentially just being this person who could be going crazy, who could be paranoid, who perhaps could be wrong, and these horrible things are maybe not really happening in real life. Maybe these connections aren't there. Maybe there's not a satanic cult that's messing with her life. So it's really interesting how it makes you question the reality of what's really happening. I love that. The Rats, I thought, was no way I was going to like it as much as Rosemary's Baby, and then I started it. The Rats starts off kind of like short stories with scenes from different characters that are being attacked by by the rodents of unusual size that are attacking the city. And then eventually it builds into some more stability of characters dealing with the rats and trying to survive the problem. But I loved it. The exciting action of people fighting giant rats, trying to survive, the horrible elements of the situation. It was great. Out of the two of them, I would say it's a close call, but I'm going to give the win to Rosemary's Baby because I like the ending of that book a little bit more than I like the ending of the rats. Just, the author's choices for how they end. That brings us down to the last bracket of 4. The next pairing was John Scalzi's duology for The Dispatcher. These are short books, which I was listening to as audiobooks, and they are very short audiobooks. I was easily able to listen to books 1 and 2 back to back. They are narrated by the actor Zachary Quinto, who I remember was on the TV show Heroes. He played the new film version of Spock in the Star Trek 2009 film, that series. Great actor. Interesting how he did the voices. I just have a huge issue. While I normally love John Scalzi's science fiction books, like Old Man's War and the Interdependency trilogy, in this duology, John Scalzi does not ever explain why these weird things are happening in the story. The characters are just like, yeah, one day reality suddenly was like this, and so we have to deal with it. It is interesting, though. The main character has a job of killing people when they are in weird situations, because the way reality has suddenly altered is that people die and come back to life in their homes. And so he's there to make sure that people die a certain way, or if they're having a surgery and there are complications, like he has to step in and deal with it. It's interesting to see how people not dying in a final sort of way affects reality. We've gotten that sort of stuff before from some other authors like Neil Shusterman with the Scythe series. It's a really fascinating concept. Here, it goes into kind of organized crime and how it might affect crime and businesses, married couples and all that sort of stuff. There's some interesting stuff in there, but overall it's a letdown that you never find out why it's happening. I'm putting the Dispatcher duology up against a bunch of 5s by James Flynn. James Flynn is an author who is here on AuthorTube, BookTube, YouTube. Really interesting stuff. This is the second short story collection by him that I've read. Both times I've read one of his books, it's given me nightmares. That good as weird stories with horror elements. I was able to get a free advanced reading copy from him as an ebook. The book doesn't come out until next summer, so you've got plenty of time, I guess, to think about getting this book and pre-ordering it and all of that. Our St. Clair Regina, she announced on her channel that she'd also received a free copy of the book, so she and I did a buddy read, and that was a lot of fun on Voxer, chatting back and forth about each story and what we thought about it. I'm going to give this win to James Flynn's book, a bunch of 5s, because it made me think. Each story in that collection had me thinking, and I like stories that make me think. It gets the win over the Dispatcher duology. I've got some more books. The last pairing here is going to be A Song of Ice and Fire prequels up against the new Vampire Chronicles books by Anne Rice. And I don't mean new as in the books are new. That's just what they're called. For A Song of Ice and Fire, George R. R. Martin released a book called A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which had 3 novellas put together in it that sort of form a story. I really enjoyed reading it because George R. R. Martin is a fantastic writer, and this takes his world that's so very interesting about 100 years before the Game of Thrones stuff started, and it gives you just a few characters to focus on in some classic fantasy settings, knights trying to prove themselves, joust competitions, some royal intrigue politics, but not overwhelmingly so. And I liked that a whole lot. I prefer that over his books that are just so huge that they have hundreds of characters and are so difficult for even him to manage that it takes him a decade or more to finish writing them. Unfortunately, I also read the other prequel, Fire and Blood, which supposedly they are making a TV series out of. And I'm very excited for the new TV series because I think George R. R. Martin's stories and characters translate very well into TV. They are very cinematic, and it's got Matt Smith as one of the stars of the series, who was one of the Doctor Who actors. He's great. But unfortunately, this book is not great. Fire and Blood. Oh, it's not a novel. Like, it tells you that. If you pay attention, before you click the button and buy it, just throw your money at it. I very much warn you, I don't know how they're making a TV series based off this, because it's not a novel with dialogue and scene by scene telling a story. It's as if they took George R. R. Martin's story building notes, his world building notes, his outlines of like the old timeline of what happened 300 years before Game of Thrones, and they just published his notes basically. It's kind of like reading the Bible. It's this happened and then this happened and these people went over here and then this happened, and it is not a normal narrative. And so I very much would warn you, you shouldn't read it unless you know what you're getting into and you're just intrigued about the world. Otherwise you may be very disappointed. We've got those A Song of Ice and Fire prequels up against some Anne Rice writing. The new Vampire Chronicles is a collected book. It's got Pandora's story in it and Vittorio the Vampire story in it. Pandora's story tangentially connects with the Lestat crew, as I would call them, all those other characters from the Vampire Chronicles, but not too much. The Vittorio story, though, is really its own. Like, at the beginning, the Vittorio narrating the story says, hey, those Lestat people and the Talamasca, they asked me to write down the story of my life, but that's all I have to do with them. He's very clear from the beginning. This is not going to be about Marius and David and Lestat and Louis and all those. Vittorio just tells his own story, which is refreshing. Actually, it was nice to get that. And then I kept reading more of Anne Rice's novels, but I'm out of room in the bracket, and that's fine, because I don't think they would win. At this point in the Vampire Chronicles series, I do want to finish the series. I want to say I've read them all. I want to know what happens to Lestat in the final trilogy and that sort of thing. But it's not on par with the original books, Interview with the Vampire, Lestat, Queen of the Damned, that sort of stuff. I'm more than happy to admit it's lower quality, but I'm still reading it. I'm still intrigued by the characters and the world. So I'm going to give this victory to George R. R. Martin's book, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Out of these last books I read for the month, it was exciting because it felt like classic fantasy. That takes up our prelims round, which means now we can focus on the next round. Let's go on up to the top. We've got Babel by R.F. Kuang against Nosferatu. I liked both of these a lot, but I'm going to give it to what I found to be the better read, Babel. R.F. Kuang made me feel a lot of emotions about these characters. With Nosferatu, it felt like a fun but kind of silly, interesting horror story. Babel, I really got involved and invested in the emotions of these characters and their identities. It's got that dark academia, coming of age, fantasy stuff that I felt worked really well. At least for me, it's the kind of book I really like. The next pairing is The Heart-Shaped Box up against Legion. Man, these two. I feel bad giving Joe Hill some losses here because I really enjoyed his writing a lot. Heart-Shaped Box is good, but I'm going to give this win to Legion. I enjoyed the possession story, all the Exorcist stuff. I like the discussion of the religious concepts and how the church deals with it and all of that. Legion is advancing. The next pair is The Omen against Rosemary's Baby. Oh, more weird possession and satanic cult type of stuff. Gonna give this victory to Rosemary's Baby. Like I said in the last round, what a great ending. It hits you. If you're not familiar with the story, it really hits you. I need to watch the film to see how that comes across in the film version. If any of you have seen the film and you want to leave me comments about it down below, please do. Let me know if it's worth taking the time to find it and watch it. The next pairing is A Bunch of Fives by James Flynn up against George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire's prequel, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Technically, these are both collections of stories because the George R. R. Martin book has 3 novellas in it and James Flynn's book has 5 short stories in it. I really enjoyed the fantasy elements in George R. R. Martin's story, but it didn't make me think. It was just interesting characters having adventures. So I'm going to give the victory here to James Flynn once again for making me think about these bizarre, weird scenarios in his story. Alright, let's go back up to the top. Now it is Babel up against Legion. To me, this is an easy victory. R.F. Kuang's book Babel wins. I mean, it just hands down wins. Even though Legion is interesting, the storytelling, I mean, let's face it, this book is older. The storytelling feels older. Babel feels really fresh to me, and that is something that I like about it. And in the next pairing, it's Rosemary's Baby up against a bunch of fives. I should have pointed out, these are our final four. Babel, Legion, Rosemary's Baby, a bunch of fives. Congratulations, books, for making it to my final four this month. So here, Rosemary's Baby, it's got that twist, which is really interesting. James Flynn's stories also, some of them have bizarre, interesting twists, but I feel like as great as those James Flynn stories are, they're just not going to top the classic Rosemary's Baby this time. So I'm giving this victory surprisingly to Ira Levin's book, Rosemary's Baby. I highly recommend it if you're not familiar with the classic. That brings us to a finals round. Oh my goodness. R.F. Kuang's book Babel up against Ira Levin's book Rosemary's Baby. We've got fantasy versus horror. I have to ask myself, which book did I enjoy more? They're both very exciting. They both have some great tense moments. They both have interesting characters that are questioning what is going on around them. I think ultimately, though, I enjoyed the character work more in Babel. R.F. Kuang is getting the victory this month. Babel is my best read of July 2022. How very exciting. Hope you've enjoyed listening to me go on and on about these books. I'll give you my TBR in my next video. That's it for today. Every day is a good day for a book talk. Peace.